My stepmother told my dad I don't visit because I hate him, when she's the one who blocks my calls. He doesn't need toxic people like you, she'd say. But I started recording our conversations. When Dad heard the truth, she got kicked out that same day. The day my stepmother Vivian moved in, she didn't just take over Dad's house. She took over his mind. It started small. Phone calls that mysteriously went to voicemail when I knew Robert was home. Text messages that disappeared before he could see them. Birthday cards that never arrived, even though I'd sent them with tracking confirmations. My father had been lonely since Mom died 3 years earlier. Patricia had been his whole world for 38 years of marriage, and losing her to cancer had left him lost and hollow. When he met Vivian at his grief support group, I was actually happy for him. She seemed sweet, attentive, and genuinely interested in making him smile again. At 52, she was 12 years younger than Robert, but still age-appropriate. She had kind eyes and spoke lovingly about wanting to take care of him. I know I can never replace Patricia, she told me during our first meeting, her hand resting gently on Robert's arm. But maybe I can help him find some happiness again. I'd been cautiously optimistic. Robert deserved to find love again, and Vivian seemed genuinely caring. She brought him homemade soup when he was feeling down, listened patiently to his stories about Mom, and even helped him organize photos for a memorial album. The first red flag should have been how quickly she moved in. They'd been dating for 4 months when she showed up at Robert's house with suitcases, claiming her landlord had suddenly evicted her for non-payment. Robert, being the gentleman he'd always been, offered to let her stay temporarily while she found a new place. Temporarily became permanently within a week. It just makes sense, Robert had explained to me over coffee. We're together most of the time anyway, and she's been such a help around the house. I should have trusted my instincts when she insisted on answering Robert's phone every time I called. He's in the shower, she'd say sweetly. Or, he's taking a nap. Or, he's not feeling well today. Always an excuse. Always delivered with that saccharine sweetness that made my skin crawl. Robert never got my card, I'd tell Vivian when she answered his phone on his birthday. Oh, that's strange, she'd say, her voice dripping with fake concern. Maybe the postal service is having issues. You know how unreliable they are these days. But I'd watched the tracking information obsessively. Delivered. Signed for by V. Mitchell at 2:47 p.m. on the exact day of Robert's birthday. When I asked Robert about it later during one of our increasingly rare conversations, he seemed genuinely confused. I never got any card, sweetheart. Are you sure you sent it to the right address? The doubt in his voice stung. I'd been sending him cards and letters at that address for 20 years, ever since I'd moved out for college. Every birthday, every holiday, every milestone. He'd never once failed to receive them before Vivian arrived. When I tried to visit for Robert's 65th birthday, Vivian answered the door with a theatrical sigh. He's resting, she said, positioning her body strategically in the doorframe to block any view inside. The stress of wondering why you never call has been really hard on him. His blood pressure has been elevated. I call every week, I protested, my heart racing with frustration and disbelief. Really? Because his phone log shows you haven't called in months. She held up his phone with a smug expression, scrolling through a call history that had been scrubbed completely clean of my number. Look for yourself. Nothing. I stared at the screen in disbelief. I'd called just 3 days ago and gotten his voicemail. I'd left a detailed message about wanting to take him to lunch for his birthday. I left a message on Wednesday about, there's no message. She cut me off smoothly, her tone shifting to that patronizing voice people use with children or the mentally unstable. Maybe you dialed the wrong number. These things happen when people get emotional and aren't thinking clearly. The way she said emotional made my skin crawl, like I was some hysterical woman who couldn't be trusted with basic tasks like dialing a phone number correctly. Can I just see him for 5 minutes? It's his birthday. I'm sorry, but he specifically asked not to be disturbed. He's been very upset about your absence from his life lately. 6 months after their wedding, Robert stopped returning my calls entirely. When I finally reached him at work, using the direct line to his office that Vivian couldn't monitor, he sounded distant, hurt, like he was talking to a stranger instead of his only daughter. I don't understand why you hate Vivian so much, he said quietly, his voice heavy with disappointment. She's been nothing but kind to you, and you treat her like absolute garbage. Dad, what are you talking about? I've barely spoken to her. She told me about the awful things you said at Christmas dinner, how you called her a gold digger and said she was trying to replace Mom, how you threw your wine glass at the wall and stormed out screaming. My blood ran cold. Dad, I wasn't at Christmas dinner. Vivian told me you wanted to spend the holidays just the two of you since it was your first Christmas as newlyweds. There was a long pause, filled only with the sound of Robert's breathing and the distant hum of his office air conditioning. That's not what happened. You came over around 3 o'clock already drunk. You ruined the entire evening. I was at my friend Janet's house for Christmas. I have photos with timestamps. I can show you. I have to go, he said abruptly. I'm in a meeting, but I could hear Vivian's voice in the background, and it sounded like she was crying. Perfect timing. The lies escalated from there, each one more elaborate and damaging than the last. According to Vivian's version of reality, I'd sent Robert cruel text messages at 2 in the morning, calling him pathetic for remarrying so quickly after Mom's death. I'd supposedly shown up at their house drunk multiple times, demanding money and screaming about how Vivian was stealing my inheritance. I'd allegedly called Vivian horrible names and threatened to contest Mom's will if Robert didn't get rid of his new wife. None of it was true. Not a single word. But Robert believed every story because Vivian was there, constant and caring, ready with tissues when he cried about his difficult daughter, who'd turned against him in his time of grief. She was brilliant, I had to admit. Every lie was crafted to play on Robert's worst fears about losing me the way he'd lost Mom. Every false story reinforced his belief that grief was making me irrational and cruel. She positioned herself as the only stable, loving presence in his life, while painting me as the unstable daughter who couldn't handle his happiness. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning, when Robert had a minor heart attack at work. I got the call from his assistant, who'd found my number in his emergency contacts, and rushed to the hospital, my heart pounding with terror at the thought of losing the only parent I had left. I was turned away by security at the cardiac unit. "I'm sorry, but you're on the restricted list," the guard said, checking his clipboard with professional indifference. "Mrs. Mitchell says you've been causing the patient stress." "Mrs. Mitchell? That's his wife, not me. I'm his daughter." I fumbled for my driver's license, my hands shaking with adrenaline and panic. "The wife specifically mentioned that the daughter might try to claim family relationship to gain access," the guard continued, his tone growing more suspicious. "She said you've been estranged for months, and that seeing you could trigger another cardiac event." Through the ICU window, I watched my father lying in that hospital bed, looking older and more fragile than I'd ever seen him. Machines beeped around him, monitoring his vital signs while IV lines snaked from his arms. Vivian sat beside him, playing the devoted wife while simultaneously destroying his relationship with his only daughter. She'd catch me looking through the glass and shake her head sadly, as if my presence there proved how unstable and dangerous I was. That night, sitting in my car in the hospital parking lot, I realized that Vivian wasn't just isolating me from Robert. She was systematically erasing me from his life, while positioning herself as his sole source of love and support. It was emotional manipulation on a level I'd never encountered before. That's when I realized I needed proof. For the next 2 months, I recorded every conversation with Vivian. I bought a high-quality digital recorder and kept it running whenever I tried to call Robert's house. I documented every blocked call, every intercepted message, every lie she told him about my supposed behavior. I created a detailed log with dates, times, and exact quotes. The first recording was almost too perfect, like Vivian was auditioning for the role of manipulative stepmother. She answered Robert's phone when I called to check on his recovery from the heart attack. "Oh, it's you," she said with that theatrical sigh I'd grown to hate. "Robert's resting. Dr. Fleming says stress could cause another heart attack, and frankly, your behavior lately has been very concerning. I just want to talk to him for 5 minutes. I'm his daughter, and I've been worried sick." "You should have thought about that before you abandoned him," she replied with cold efficiency. "He's been asking why you haven't visited or called since he got home from the hospital. It's breaking his heart. I've called every day for 2 weeks. You keep telling me he's sleeping or too sick. That's not true, and you know it. Stop trying to rewrite history to make yourself feel better about abandoning your father when he needed you most." 20 minutes later, I heard Vivian talking to Robert in the background, her voice shifting to that sweet, concerned tone she used when she thought I couldn't hear. "Your daughter called again," she told him while I was still on the line, having muted my end to listen. "I told her you were too sick for visitors, but she just got angry and hung up on me. She said some very hurtful things about how I'm keeping her from you. I think she might be drinking again." Again. There had never been a drinking problem before, but Vivian had been planting those seeds for months. The pattern became crystal clear through the recordings. Vivian would answer Robert's phone, tell me he couldn't talk, then immediately tell him I'd called just to harass them or demand something. She'd delete my voicemails before he could hear them, then tell him I never called. She'd intercept delivery notifications for packages and cards, then claim they never arrived. But the most damaging recording came 3 weeks after Robert's heart attack, when she thought he was napping upstairs. She called her sister Sophia, and I caught the entire conversation because she'd put her phone on speaker. "He's completely isolated now," Vivian laughed, her voice carrying that cruel edge I'd learned to recognize. "She can't get through to him, and he thinks she's abandoned him just like his first wife did before she died. Are you sure this is working?" Sophia's voice came through clearly. "What if he figures it out?" "Oh, it's working perfectly. He's already talking about changing his will. The inheritance will be all mine once I convince him to cut her out completely. Another few months of this and she'll be written off as the ungrateful daughter who turned her back on her grieving father." "What if she tries to visit in person?" "Security system," Vivian said smugly. "I had cameras installed last week. If she shows up uninvited, I'll call the police and say she's harassing us. Robert will see it as proof that she's become unstable and potentially dangerous." "You're terrible," Sophia laughed, "but brilliant. The beautiful thing is, he's doing all the emotional work for me. Every time I tell him she hasn't called, he gets more hurt and disappointed. Every time I say she refused to visit him in the hospital, he believes I'm the only one who truly cares about him. I'm not even lying directly, I'm just controlling the information flow." I sat in my car outside their house, listening to this conversation with hands that shook so badly I could barely hold the recorder. This woman wasn't just isolating my father from me, she was systematically destroying his mental image of who I was as a person, while positioning herself as his savior. The recordings kept coming over the following weeks. Vivian bragging to friends about how easy it was to manipulate a lonely widower. Vivian coaching Sophia on what to say if Robert ever called to verify her stories. Vivian researching elder law attorneys and looking into how to contest inheritance claims. Vivian calling financial advisors to discuss how quickly she could access Robert's accounts if something happened to him. But the most chilling recording was Vivian talking to herself, practicing the performance she'd give Robert when he woke up from his afternoon nap. "Your daughter called while you were sleeping," she rehearsed, modulating her voice to sound appropriately sad and concerned. "She was very upset that you haven't been returning her calls. I tried to explain that you've been recovering from your heart attack, but she started yelling at me again. She said some very hurtful things about how I'm keeping you from her and manipulating you against her. I think she might be drinking again. Maybe we should look into getting her some help." The drinking again was a masterful touch. There had never been a drinking before, but Vivian had been planting seeds about my supposed alcohol problem for months, mentioning it casually whenever Robert seemed to doubt her stories about my behavior. 3 months after Robert's heart attack, I finally got my chance. Vivian had gone to visit Sophia for the weekend, leaving Robert alone for the first time since they'd married. It was the opening I'd been waiting for. I called his house and he answered on the second ring. "Dad, it's me. Please don't hang up." "Sweetheart?" His voice sounded surprised, confused, like he hadn't heard from me in years instead of days. "Where have you been? I've been so worried about you. I've been trying to reach you for months, Dad. Vivian keeps telling me you don't want to talk to me. That's not true at all. She said you haven't called since I got out of the hospital. She said you were angry about something and didn't want to see me recover." My heart broke a little more. "Dad, I need you to listen to something very carefully. Can you sit down?" I played him the recording of Vivian talking to Sophia about the inheritance, then the one where she coached her sister on lying to Robert, then the one where she practiced fake conversations to make me look unstable and uncaring. The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. "Dad, are you still there? Play that first one again," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. I did. When Vivian's voice filled the room, laughing about isolating him and stealing his inheritance, I heard my father make a sound I'd never heard before. A mix between a sob and a growl of pure rage. "She's been lying to me," he whispered. "All of it. Every single thing she told me. I have hours of recordings, Dad. She's been systematically cutting me out of your life while making you think I abandoned you when you needed me most. The Christmas dinner story where you supposedly threw the wine glass? Never happened. I spent Christmas at Janet's house watching movies and eating takeout Chinese food. I have photos with timestamps. The drunk phone calls where you supposedly yelled at her and called her names? I've never been drunk when I called you, Dad. And I've never yelled at Vivian. She hangs up on me before I can say more than hello most of the time." Robert was quiet for a long time, and I could hear him breathing heavily, probably processing the magnitude of Vivian's deception. When he spoke again, his voice was different, harder, angrier than I'd heard since Mom died. "She made me think my only daughter hated me. She made me believe you'd turned your back on me when I was grieving and vulnerable. I would never do that, Dad. You know that deep down. I thought I knew that. But she was so convincing, so detailed in her stories. She had explanations for everything. She'd cry when she told me about the cruel things you'd supposedly said to her. She's been manipulating both of us, Dad, keeping us apart so she could control the narrative and position herself as your only source of support. Come over," he said suddenly, his voice stronger than it had been in months. "Right now, before she gets back tomorrow evening." I was there in 15 minutes, my heart pounding with a mixture of hope and terror. When Robert opened the door, he looked older than his 65 years, but his eyes were clear and focused for the first time since Vivian had entered our lives. "Show me everything," he said. We spent the next 4 hours going through my recordings, my documentation, my phone logs showing hundreds of attempted calls. I showed him the tracking confirmations for cards and packages that had been delivered but never reached him. I pulled up photos from Christmas, from birthdays, from all the events Vivian claimed I'd ruined with my supposedly erratic behavior. "She's been living off my grief," Robert said finally, his voice filled with a cold fury I'd rarely seen. "She knew I was vulnerable after losing your mother, and she used that vulnerability to isolate me from the one person who actually loves me unconditionally. What are you going to do? I'm going to end this before she destroys anything else." When Vivian returned Sunday evening, she found her bags packed and sitting on the front porch like discarded trash. Robert and I were waiting in the living room with Dr. Fleming, the family therapist who'd been helping Robert process his grief before Vivian had convinced him to stop going to sessions. "What's going on here?" Vivian asked, her voice already shifting into victim mode as she surveyed the scene. "Robert, sweetheart, why are my things outside? Is this some kind of joke?" "Sit down," Robert said calmly, his voice carrying an authority I hadn't heard in years. "We need to have a very serious conversation. Did she put you up to this?" Vivian gestured toward me with the kind of dismissive wave you'd give to an annoying insect. "I told you she was becoming unstable. She's probably been filling your head with lies and conspiracy theories. The only lies came from you." Robert cut her off. pressing play on the digital recorder. Vivian's voice filled the room. The inheritance will be all mine once I convince him to cut her out completely. The color drained from Vivian's face as her own words played back to her. She opened her mouth to speak, but Robert held up his hand for silence. "There's more," he said grimly. For the next 30 minutes, we played recording after recording. Vivian scheming with Sophia about how to manipulate a grieving widower. Vivian practicing fake conversations to make me look unstable. Vivian bragging about how easy it was to turn a father against his own daughter. "Those recordings are illegal," Vivian finally sputtered when the audio stopped, her mask of sweet concern slipping completely. "You can't use them against me." "I'm not using them in court," Robert said, his voice deadly calm. "I'm using them to see who you really are. And what I see is someone who preyed on my grief to steal my money and destroy my relationship with my daughter." "Robert, please, you don't understand the full situation. I understand perfectly. You're a con artist who targeted a grieving widower, and you're no longer welcome in my home." Dr. Fleming, who'd been quietly taking notes throughout the confrontation, looked up from his notepad. "Mrs. Mitchell, what you've done constitutes emotional abuse and financial manipulation of a vulnerable adult. I'm required by law to report this behavior to Adult Protective Services." Vivian's mask finally slipped completely. Gone was the sweet, caring woman who'd comforted my grieving father and played the devoted wife. In her place stood someone cold, calculating, and filled with rage at being exposed. "You think you've won something here?" she snarled at me, her voice dripping with venom. "He's old and he's lonely. When you can't be here every day to take care of him, when you get busy with your own life again, he'll remember how I was the one who actually cared enough to be here." "Get out," Robert said quietly, but his voice carried the weight of absolute finality. "Get out of my house and don't ever come back. This is my house too. We're legally married. We're getting divorced tomorrow morning. And if you contest it or try to claim any part of my assets, these recordings become evidence of fraud and elder abuse in a court of law." Vivian grabbed her bags with shaking hands and left without another word, but not before shooting me a look of pure hatred that made my skin crawl. That night, Robert and I sat on his back porch, drinking coffee and talking until sunrise. He apologized probably 100 times for believing Vivian's lies, for doubting me, for letting a stranger turn him against his own daughter. I told him 100 times that it wasn't his fault, that she'd been a professional manipulator who'd preyed on his vulnerability during the most difficult period of his life. "I almost lost you," he said as the sun came up, painting the sky in soft pastels. "My only child. And I almost lost you because I believed a stranger over my own daughter. But you didn't lose me, Dad. I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere." The aftermath wasn't as simple as just moving on. The damage Vivian had done ran deeper than either of us had initially realized. In the weeks following her departure, Robert struggled with waves of shame and self-doubt that would hit him at random moments. "How could I have been so stupid?" he asked me one evening as we sat in his living room, going through photo albums from before Vivian had entered our lives. "I'm a smart man. I ran a successful business for 30 years. How did I let her fool me so completely?" "You weren't stupid, Dad. You were grieving and vulnerable, and she was a professional predator who knew exactly how to exploit that vulnerability. But I believed her over you, my own daughter. I actually thought you'd abandoned me." The pain in his voice was almost unbearable. Dr. Fleming had warned us that recovery from this kind of emotional manipulation would take time. Robert had to rebuild not just his relationship with me, but his trust in his own judgment. 6 months later, Robert and I have rebuilt our relationship stronger than ever before. He sees Dr. Fleming twice a week and has learned to recognize the warning signs of emotional manipulation. We've established new traditions: Sunday morning breakfast at his favorite diner, weekly movie nights, and monthly trips to places he and Mom had always wanted to visit. Vivian tried to contest the divorce and demand substantial alimony, but when her lawyer heard the recordings, he advised her to accept Robert's minimal settlement offer and disappear quietly to avoid criminal charges for elder fraud. We learned later that Robert wasn't Vivian's first victim. The private investigator Robert hired discovered that she'd been married 3 times before, always to older widowers, and always with the same pattern of isolation and financial manipulation. Her real name wasn't even Vivian Mitchell. It was Victoria Marsh, and she had a criminal record for elder fraud in 2 other states. The most disturbing discovery was a notebook found in her belongings that contained detailed profiles of potential targets from the grief support group. She'd been studying the men there like a predator studies prey, noting their financial situations, their vulnerabilities, their relationships with family members. Sometimes I wonder how long Vivian's plan would have taken to fully work if I hadn't started recording our conversations. Would Robert have eventually cut me out of his will completely? Would I have given up trying to reach him and moved on with my life? The thought terrifies me, but it also reminds me why documentation and persistence matter when someone is trying to rewrite your reality. When someone is systematically destroying your relationships, when they're gaslighting you and rewriting history to serve their agenda, evidence is the only thing that can cut through the lies. Truth has power, but only when you can prove it with facts that can't be disputed or explained away. Robert keeps copies of those recordings in his safe deposit box now, not because he enjoys listening to them, but because they remind him never to let loneliness and grief make him vulnerable to predators again. He's also shared them with adult protective services to help them recognize similar patterns of abuse in other cases. And me? I've learned that sometimes the people who seem most helpful and caring are the ones doing the most damage behind the scenes. Vivian didn't steal from Robert with violence or obvious threats. She stole from him with kindness and manipulation, making him complicit in his own isolation from the people who truly loved him. The experience has also taught me the importance of trusting my instincts. From the beginning, something about Vivian felt wrong, but I ignored those feelings because I wanted Robert to be happy. Now I know that gut feelings about people often contain important information that our conscious minds haven't fully processed yet. Robert has started dating again, cautiously, with Dr. Fleming's guidance and my support. He's learned to introduce potential partners to me early in the relationship and to be suspicious of anyone who tries to isolate him from family and friends. He's also more aware of his own vulnerability and the tactics that predators use to exploit lonely people. But in the end, truth won out over deception. Love proved stronger than manipulation, and the woman who tried to destroy our family is exactly where she belongs, out of our lives forever, hopefully getting the professional help she needs to stop preying on vulnerable people. The recordings that saved my relationship with Robert weren't just evidence of Vivian's lies and manipulation. They were proof that when someone tries to rewrite your story and steal your family, the only way to fight back is with truth, documented carefully and presented clearly. And sometimes, that's exactly what love looks like, not giving up on the people who matter most, even when the whole world seems convinced that you're the problem. Sometimes love means fighting for the truth, even when it's painful and difficult and everyone thinks you're crazy. Because in the end, families are worth fighting for. Truth is worth fighting for. And the people who try to destroy those things with lies and manipulation deserve to face the consequences of their actions. Today, Robert and I are closer than we've ever been. We talk every day, see each other multiple times a week, and he's actively involved in my life in a way he never was before this ordeal. In some strange way, Vivian's attempt to destroy our relationship actually made it stronger by forcing us to fight for each other. The recordings are still locked away, serving as both evidence and reminder. But mostly, we don't need to think about them anymore. We're too busy living the life that Vivian tried to steal from us, a life filled with love, trust, and the unbreakable bond between a father and daughter who refuse to let anyone come between them.